but moving right along, we hit that bye week. It's kind of a nice bye week after two really, really, two big games, potentially three, depending on what you think of Syracuse. It's a very tough opening slate for Clemson. So this bye week, I think you get two of them again this year. That's just kind of how the schedule's worked out, like it did last year. So it's going to be nice to kind of break up, these stretches of games. This is a run that I think is going to be interesting for a number of reasons, and I don't necessarily see a loss in any of these next three games. But these are teams that have really intriguing situations. I'm going to start, of course, with that October 4th matchup in Keenan Memorial Stadium in Chapel Hill against the Fighting Bill Belichick's. This is a team that I really don't know what to think about this year. They are probably the most transfer heavy team in the ACC right now. Something like I don't even remember how many guys they brought in, but it seems like most of their depth chart is going to be transfers this season. It starts with quarterback Gio Lopez, who they got from South Alabama. I think a guy that can play some really, really good football, very mobile, not the biggest guy in the world, but I think he's a guy that could give Clemson some trouble. But I just overall, like, what is the identity for this North Carolina team going to be under Bill Belichick? What are they? What is going to be the emphasis? Because we've just never seen Bill Belichick at the college level, at least in any meaningful way. I think he was like a grad assistant under Lou Holtz back in the '70s or something. But that's about it. You don't really know what this program is going to be like. Have they taken on the identity of Bill Belichick? Because that's one thing that North Carolina teams in the past I've always questioned is, are they tough? Like, do they always seemed like they certainly had talented football players over the years. They've had some really good quarterback play, but defensively has always been a struggle for them. Haven't really seen a good North Carolina defense in quite some time, and they just haven't. Even with the talent they've had at running back and that skill, along with quarterback, they haven't really been able to do much with it. And so now this year is a group that I think is just a full of new faces. So, the identity, what schematically, what are they going to look like? I think those are a lot of questions that need to be asked and answered before we, conclude whether or not this team will be, really bad or, it might be okay. I don't know. I don't see a scenario where this team is, just is like 10-2 and like one of the better teams in the ACC. I don't really see that for them with this many new faces in year one of the Bill Belichick experiment. But I do think this is a team that you got to take seriously, and you got to make sure that you're prepared because they. I think in a couple of years, maybe this is a program that looks a little bit different from a body type, from a tough mental toughness standpoint. So we'll see what this team looks like.
Yeah, North Carolina is one of those teams in the ACC this year where, honestly, you have no idea, right? Like, I mean, they essentially have an entire new roster. They make probably the splash hire of all splash hires, hiring, Bill Belichick as their head coach. But, as you mentioned, we don't know what Bill Belichick looks like in college football. It is not the same as NFL. And I'm not saying that Bill Belichick's not a good coach and that he cannot be a successful college football coach, but it's not the same. You have limited hours that you spend with the players. These are not NFL players, and Bill Belichick, he likes to, really run some scheme on defense and try to confuse quarterbacks. Is his personnel going to be able to keep up with that kind of stuff? Those are all questions that I have, and he's got a mostly NFL staff with him, people with very little college experience, period. And you're bringing in basically a whole new team via the transfer portal. That's a lot of moving pieces to just assume that that's all going to fall in place and you're going to have a successful season. What does a successful season look like for, North Carolina this year? I think, probably like a mid-level ACC team. but they probably have a large variable. It could completely fall apart like it did for Florida State last year, when they heavily relied on the transfer portal, or they can be a pretty tough out team in the ACC. Um, I tend to think they'll be probably a mid-level team. They won't be a terrible team, but I don't think 9-3 or 10-2 is in the cards for North Carolina this year. I just think there's too many moving pieces there. There's too much new for it to kind of hit year one. But again, we'll see. We'll see how long Belichick wants to stick around North Carolina. We'll see how long he wants to be a college football coach. But I definitely think Clemson goes in there, gets the W against North Carolina.
Yep, I'm with you. Um, Heading on to the next week, back the second of back-to-back road games. Heading up to Chestnut Hill, taking on BC. The return of the O'Rourke McFadden rivalry trophy, whatever you want to call it. Yes, these two programs do have a rivalry trophy. BC is going to be is interesting. This is a program that I think, with Bill O'Brien. It's funny because you're facing Bill Belichick and then Bill O'Brien back to back. It's funny how that kind of worked out. And I think with Bill O'Brien and this program, I don't think they've truly figured out their identity yet. I mean, last season was the Tommy Castellanos experiment just did not work. Just was not a scheme fit. It wasn't a lot of anything. I think Grayson James kind of settled things down a little bit, towards the back half of the season. But he's not even going to be the starting quarterback because they brought in highly touted transfer from Alabama, Dylan Lonergan, and he has won the job. I think that does kind of raise the ceiling a little bit with this group, because I do think Dylan is a very talented football player. He was a two-sport athlete coming out of high school. I remember he was committed to South Carolina at one point before committing to Georgia and then transferring out. I think not Georgia, Alabama, and transferring out. I think he's a guy that I think can raise kind of the ceiling of this group. One thing BC always does is they're always going to be tough defensively. I think that's something that they've started to kind of get back to doing under Bill O'Brien. And offensively, you're going to see a lot more pro style schemes, and you're going to see some. You're going. I think Dylan Lonergan is a guy that's going to offer some mobility as well, but also the ability to hit some of those bigger time throws that Tommy Castellanos was able to do. Going up to Chestnut Hill, it's always a sleepy kind of atmosphere. That's always the thing that you kind of worry about. It's a very trying trip, and it's going to be October. It's not going to be very warm. That's a game that you don't have your A game or you don't have your best stuff. You could find yourself kind of in a struggle game for a half or two, or maybe even three quarters. Especially it being the second of back-to-back road games. This is a game where it wouldn't surprise me if Clemson did not play all that well. Just because of the schedule dynamics of where this game falls on the schedule and the location. But you can't let that you can't let that turn into a loss. Can't let that turn into something where a blemish on your season. So I think this team will take care of business, but it would not surprise me if this game was a little bit more annoying than maybe you would anticipate coming in to the season.
Yeah, you mentioned the sleepy atmosphere of Boston College. Certainly a place that you got to bring your own energy. Maybe that's one of Dabo's next iconic sayings. I don't know. He can have it if he wants it. I'll freely give it to him. No, I'm just kidding. But it's definitely a place you got to bring your energy to. It's a place you really that you mentioned the veteran leadership on Clemson. This is another example of where that veteran leadership, that player-led leadership, is going to have to step up and make sure everybody is treating this game with the proper respect that it deserves, right? Boston College has never been a world beater, right? But in the right circumstances, they can absolutely sneak up and beat you and embarrass you. So it's definitely a game where Clemson's going to have to go in very focused. Like I said, bring their own energy. Ultimately, I just don't think that Boston College has the athletes to match up with this Clemson Tiger team. Um, we'll see how the quarterback position works out for them. I know they like the direction that they're going in, but again, they're gonna that's gonna be an interesting matchup there. But again, like you said, I fully expect Clemson to go in here and take care of business. But it could definitely be one of those games where it's a little bit closer than you like, and we didn't play well. It could be one of our post game lives where we're breaking down a win, but we're not really happy about the performance that was out on the field, which happened quite often last year, unfortunately.
Yeah, 100%. So this is going to be a test for them. You're playing back-to-back guys that have spent a lot of time in the NFL. So you're going to see some really really tough play out of both of them. I think. Even
Yeah,
if they are at a disadvantage talent wise. So we'll see
yeah. I
what
mean,
we can have for them.
those two coaches will certainly bring some schematics and some different flavors that you probably don't see quite as often in college football. So that could, yeah, you're right. That could definitely bring some unique challenges playing both North Carolina and Boston College.
Yep. And then following that, back home in Memorial Stadium, the ACC championship rematch, SMU coming into town. This is a game that has certainly on paper is a game that a lot of people are going to circle. Uh, you know, SMU is a program that kind of like Syracuse, but to a lesser degree. I have some questions about how much of last season is going to be replicable. At least, especially with year one with for SMU in a Power Four conference. I mean, they absolutely exceeded expectations in a lot of ways, and making the playoff last year was very big, despite not how it ended. But they do lose quite a few pieces from last year's squad. They returned Kevin Jennings, but they've lost pieces on the offensive line. They've had to replace. Defense. They have a lot of new faces. I question kind of what this program, whether they have built up enough to expect to be at a similar level to what they were last year. I think they're recruiting really well under Rhett Lashley, and I think that eventually, they're going to have a roster that's capable of playing with anybody in the ACC. But right now, I think they had a favorable schedule first of all, and then I think they had a lot of pieces just kind of hit for them last year, and I don't know if that's going to be the case this year. It's good to have a known commodity in Kevin Jennings at quarterback, and he's certainly going to be a problem again. But I like Clemson's chances at home, and with SMU breaking in, so with SMU kind of having a lot of newer faces than they did last year. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, this is definitely, it's got some good storylines coming into the game. Obviously, the rematch of the ACC title game, and as you mentioned, SMU was a great story from last year. They definitely proved that they belong in the Power Four, and as you mentioned, a lot of things hit for them last year. But much like what I said about Syracuse, I think ultimately you have to believe that they take a step back this year because of the amount of talent that they lost. Right? You talk about their offensive line, right? The pieces on defense that they lost, and although Rhett Lashley does recruit well, as you mentioned, when you're coming from a group of five to a power five, a group of four, or a group of five to a power four level, excuse me, um, you typically, like, you're not going to have that depth, right? And when you have a lot of key pieces walk out of the door, I think it's just going to take SMU a few years to kind of get that roster in a place where when you lose some significant pieces, it's not as detrimental to you. I don't at all think SMU is going to be a bad team this year. I'm not saying that at all. They still got Kevin Jennings at quarterback. That dude's an absolute baller. He's a guy that's going to keep you in a lot of games because he's gonna make plays. That's just what he does. So I do think they will be a decent team this year, but I think they take a step back from last year. They also had a very favorable schedule last year. They missed most of the quote unquote big dogs in the ACC with their schedule, so they got some favors when it comes to their schedule last year. And I just think you got to think that they're going to take a step or two back this year. Not that they'll be a bad team, but they're not going to, I think, be able to produce at the level that they did last year because of the pieces that they lost.
Yep, 100%.